Hi, everyone. Welcome. So glad that you could be with us here today. I'm Liz Dozier. I'm the founder and the CEO of Chicago Beyond. For those of you who don't know, Chicago Beyond is a philanthropic organization that addresses systemic inequity by exponentially increasing impact of community-backed solutions. Since our inception, which was in 2016, it's hard to believe it has been that long, but since 2016, we've invested more than $50 million of catalytic funding in over 200 individuals and community organizations, while also leading various national systems change efforts in the areas of philanthropy and health and in criminal justice. And 2 years ago, we had the honor and privilege of investing over $1 million of resources and supports and partnering with one of our panelists, Janine Valerie Logan, who is a midwife. She is a trailblazer in maternal health, and she is currently building the only freestanding birth center on Chicago's South Side. So we know that change cannot happen without leaders like Janine, but it takes all of us, truly takes all of us collectively in Chicago and nationwide to elicit change. And that's why we're here today. So in alignment with our commitment, Chicago Beyond is also fostering this idea of uplifting voices in community and in this space. And so amid the ongoing maternal mortality crisis that exists here in the United States, we must highlight also the bright spots. And today we're going to do just that. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for spending your time with us today. And it is my pleasure to introduce Sona Smith, who's going to be our moderator. She's a birth justice advocate and also the birth justice program officer for the Ms. Foundation. So join me in welcoming Sona.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Liz. It's an honor to be here amongst such powerful and impactful panelists who are each working to eliminate disparities in birth experiences and outcomes. Today, we hope to root ourselves in a shared understanding of the state of birth justice in America, as well as discuss some practical solutions that can inspire us all to collaborate and take action in order to advance safer and more equitable birth outcomes. I am proud to introduce our panelists. My dear friend of nearly 4 years, Janine Valerie Logan, who is a relentless advocate for birth equity, dedicating her career to addressing disparities in Black maternal health. Janine is currently spearheading the creation of Chicago Southside Birth Center, a nonprofit, midwife-led, and community-focused haven for expectant mothers and birthing people on Chicago's South Side. The award-winning filmmaker, author, and entrepreneur, Tanya Lewis-Lee. Tanya's work often explores the personal impact of social justice issues. She co-directed and co-produced a very powerful film exploring the U.S. maternal mortality crisis, Aftershock. This film brings us to the forefront of the growing birth justice movement that is demanding systemic change within our medical system and government. And last but definitely not least, our very own Liz Dozier, who you've heard from today in our welcome. She has spent her career tirelessly working to support young people in Chicago and nationwide. Chicago Beyond's approach recenters the humanist in philanthropy. I want to thank you to all of the panelists for being here. And before we dive into our conversation today, I want to root us in a shared understanding of birth justice as a component of the reproductive justice movement and framework, which was founded in Chicago in 1994 by a group of Black women. Reproductive justice is defined by Sister Song as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent those children in safe and sustainable communities. Southern Birth Justice Network maintains that birth justice as a component of reproductive justice includes access to care during the childbearing years that is holistic, humanistic, and culturally centered. This health care is across the pregnancy spectrum, including abortion, miscarriage, prenatal care, birthing, and postpartum care. The unfortunate reality is that here in the US, we have one of the highest maternal mortality rates of all developed nations. Black women are dying at 3 to 4 times the rate of white women in birth. which is one of the widest racial disparities in women's health. Systemic racism, implicit bias, and anti-Blackness all contribute to these significant disparities. Additionally, we know that right now, reproductive health, rights, and justice has taken center stage in many conversations due to the increasing threats on bodily autonomy, family planning, and more. All of these injustices are interconnected. As Audre Lorde says, there's no single issue struggles because we do not lead single issue lives. Despite the alarming maternal and infant mortality rates and the growing attacks on reproductive freedoms, we know that change is underway. There's a powerful movement for birth justice happening right now in the US, and that momentum is driven by everyday people with both lived and professional experience who are taking matters into their own hands to provide services, advocate, fund, storytell, and build solutions that will make a difference in the lives of birthing families. And today we're going to have an opportunity to learn from and alongside some of those people. Please note there will be time for a Q&A at the end of our conversation. So please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box. A crucial part of this issue is bringing awareness to the issues and educating the nation to the ongoing crisis. I'm so glad we have Tanya here to talk a little bit about that awareness and what is moving the needle. Tanya, women's health is very clearly at the forefront of your work, and there's a beautiful intersection between your storytelling and your development of women's vitamins. While there is currently a spotlight on maternal mortality, you have been raising awareness for quite a long time. Can you tell us a bit from your research and conversations, what are some examples that you've seen of getting it right? Are there models that have inspired you that could be replicated?
Good afternoon, Sona, and everybody. It is really a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me in this conversation. I really appreciate your remarks. And I think, as you say, you know, it is local, it is state, it is national, it is all of us, which is why I'm here today to lend my voice to this conversation. Well, first I want to say that as we talk about reproductive justice, the thing that comes to mind to me is that, and we talk about anti-Blackness, the way you destabilize a community is to go for the womb. Let's be clear, because you come through the womb. And I think that we have to just acknowledge that by birthing, by bringing forth our children, by raising them up in the way that we know we want to raise our children, we are a threat to the larger society. And they are very threatened right now. And we know that by the actions that are being taken. So the work that we are doing here is extremely important because we are the foundation of our communities. This is not just work, sometimes I worry that people think about, oh, it's women and it's children and it's birthing and this is everything. This is the foundation of our communities, and it is of the utmost importance. And I think we all know that here, but I just felt like I had to articulate that. In terms of what is actually out there working and the models that I see, I mean, I think what we're seeing is what we're doing right here, right now, it's community up. It always is. The community knows what the answers are. They know what the issues are. When I made my film Aftershock, it was quite clear to me that the community already knew what was happening. It was the broader public that while we were saying, hold on, something's going on, they were telling us we were crazy, that it wasn't something that was happening to us, but that's something we were doing. But the models that I see that are working are people like, certainly like Janine. I mean, I know the work that Janine's been doing for a long time, and I want to also mention Jenny Joseph in Florida. She is an amazing midwife. I think that the midwives have always been also the backbone of our communities, and they have been wiped out. They have been vilified and destroyed, and therefore we have lost a connectivity to the information about how our bodies function, how our bodies work, how to get the support that we need. And so when I see warrior midwives like Jenny Joseph, like Janine, who are working in communities to provide the services that women need. I see that helping. I appreciate the doula care model also working alongside midwives. I think what happens these days, though, doulas tend to get a lot of the conversation, and people don't even know the difference between doulas and midwives and how they work. So I think that we need to make sure that people are understanding who is playing what role and how those roles work. I am inspired and optimistic, certainly in my city right now. Just yesterday, New York City announced that they're raising $11 million for a fund for maternal health, something that is going to reinvest in our communities. They're going to resource community-based health and social networks. So really, again, going community up and center Black women. I think, and also look at maternal mortality review committees and really see what the recommendations come out from there. But again, I think that the real models that work are when everybody has all hands on deck, we're listening to community, and we are moving up from bottom up, not top down.
Thank you so much for that answer. And thank you for lifting the work of midwives. Today is actually Black Midwifery Day. And so we definitely want to honor the legacy of the granny midwives and all Black midwives in the US who are and have always been working towards birth justice. So with that, Janine, I'll ask you, my warrior midwife friend, we know that no change will happen without the work that is happening on the ground, like Tanya said, from direct service providers such as birth workers, midwives, doulas, and others who are working to meet the needs of women and birthing people, to grassroots organizing and advocacy strategies that focus on policy and systems change. You are currently on the ground building the Chicago Southside Birth Center. This is no small feat. We are very proud of you, and we know that there's still a lot much more work to be done. Can you tell us more about what led you to creating Chicago Southside Birth Center?
Thank you, Sona. Thanks for asking that question. And I really appreciate you lifting up the work of National Black Midwives Alliance. Today is a very special day, so I really think it's beautiful and important that we're having this conversation today. Long story short, I don't think Black midwives come into midwifery thinking they're just going to catch babies. I do think our work goes hand in hand with being advocates for our community. I feel like I'm no different. And so the start of the birth center came from a long time of dreaming of a space that I would want to be at. When my partner and I were experiencing our first pregnancy, there were no birth centers in Illinois, and also no Black out of hospital midwives. And so it was a moment of being something that you don't see. But it was actually the summer of 2020, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, and we were at the height of the pandemic, and it was really that time and that movement where the need for a space like this became very great and critical that we provide that. It was, after in our community, there were 4 OB units that had closed and more pending to close. There were a lack of midwifery services. And so we really knew that this was the time to create something that we didn't have, right? We've been traditionally relying on the medical industrial complex. And this is where we hear about the horrible statistics and where we see the devastating outcomes. And so we knew that a response to create a space that was racially and culturally concordant, that was safe, that provided midwifery care was needed in the community, not only to mitigate these outcomes, but it's just something that we deserve, right? We deserve to be in spaces that honor our autonomy, that honor our presentation, that honor and affirm our genders. And so it was really, really important to us that we create that space.
Thank you,
Thank
Janine.
you, Sona.
We're so grateful for that space, and we look forward to you opening the doors. Tanya, the next question is for you. You've taken on this national issue in many ways, but one of the most visible is your use of art as a medium to change hearts and minds. Your 2022 documentary, Aftershock, was a striking story about the tragic deaths of two mothers, both from childbirth-related complications. Can you talk more about how a film like Aftershock can contribute to a culture shift as well as advance the movement of birth justice?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the thing that has been really wonderful about making a film in this way is that, as you say, we were able to change hearts and minds because we're able to humanize the issue. Often people, you'll read about something and you hear the statistics, but the statistics are numbers and people don't understand that they're human beings. And to be able to show in a film what the human cost is can be very powerful to people. It was really important with the film at the beginning. We were very fortunate that Shamani's sister is a aspiring filmmaker. And so she took a lot of family videos. And so we had a lot of videos of Shamani. And it was really important at the very beginning of the film for you to meet Shamani alive and vibrant and just the beautiful spirit that she was, so that by the time you got to understand what we were talking about, you felt the impact of that loss, and similarly to the way her family felt it. And what I have found with the film is that it does provide an opportunity and a space for us to be able to have a conversation about what's really happening out in our communities, and so that we can have dialogue about how we fix it. Aftershock has been seen not just by community, but hospitals and med schools and insurance companies, local governments, state governments, federal government. They want to watch the film and then be able to say, oh my God, we really need to do something about it. So art really does have a way of reaching people in a way that is not so academic, that can galvanize people into action.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you for that film. Thanks, Tanya and Janine, for sharing such beautiful examples about what moves the needle and the importance of the work being done on the ground. I'd like to pivot our conversation a bit to discussing the role of funders and how funders can strategically work to advance birth justice. This is something I know a bit about. I'm the Birth Justice Program Officer for the Ms. Foundation for Women, and I'm responsible for developing and implementing our birth justice funding strategy. The mission of Ms. is to build women's collective power in the U.S. to advance equity and justice for all. We achieve our mission by investing in and strengthening the capacity of women-led movements to advance meaningful social, cultural, and economic change for all. We launched our Birth Justice Initiative in 2022 as a grant-making strategy to advance equitable birth outcomes and to strengthen the capacity, organizational infrastructure, and financial stability of grassroots organizations that are led by Black, Indigenous, and women of color who are working on birth justice strategies. To date, we've invested more than $4 million in funding and capacity building resources to support grassroots organizations. Our report, Pocket Change: How Women of Color Do More with Less, revealed that philanthropy has significantly underfunded and underinvested in organizations that are led by and for women and girls of color. We have chosen to prioritize these organizations. Our birth justice portfolio currently supports 61 grassroots organizations nationwide. It's a mix of rural, urban, emerging, and established organizations that amplify projects centering Black birthing people of all genders, Indigenous birthing people, and those who work along the full spectrum of intersectional issues that comprise birth justice. Soon, we're going to announce our most recent grant awards, and also we're releasing a paper that examines the barriers and stigma that Black women encounter when being faced with issues around infertility. One of our purposes is to really weave into all the intersections of birth justice and understand that there's a full spectrum of disparities that exist. And so I feel honored to be able to support folks like Janine and Chicago Southside Birth Center, who is one of our initial grantee partners. And so, Janine, this question is for you. In your experience, how has funder support and engagement positively impacted your work? And on the other side of that, what have been some of the challenges you've encountered accessing funding for your work?
Thank you, Sona. I want to first set the stage. I was new to this. You know, some people like, are you new to this? I'm true to this. I was new to this, all of this. So my first grants, up until about a month ago, I wrote all the grants for Chicago Southside Birth Center. So it became very evident that without grant funding, we weren't going to ever open. Funding can make or break a project, and when it is a new project and the funder doesn't really know you, it could come with some limitations in terms of like, how do you prove yourself? How do you encourage a funder to take a risk on something that's so new? And I wouldn't say like birth centers are new in this part of the world, specifically Illinois, but not anywhere else. So it was really conveying our story, conveying the outcomes that we wanted to have, and conveying the need for a space like this. I think it's mutually beneficial for funders and partners to have a deep commitment to changing systems and a deep trust and understanding. And so I feel like that has been something that has benefited us, to have partners that we are building relationships with and building trust, and them really wanting to do beautiful systemic change work. I'm grateful to all, like I said, all those funders who took a chance on us and have found out that if you keep talking and keep telling your story, that others will listen. Since 2022, I've been a leader in residence at Chicago Beyond. And what that means, I've been invested in to dream and create and be innovative about the kind of space that we're developing. That is a privilege, and not many organizations, especially Black women-led organizations, have that opportunity. And so that has been life-changing for us. But when I think of the challenges for not only myself, but other organizations who are just starting, who have a very small staff and resources, how that can be a barrier, not having that opportunity to really go 100% into the work that you're doing. Another challenge that I see is that funding is never enough, right? And so you have many organizations vying for the same opportunities, specifically around birth justice. There's never enough funding. And I really encourage funders to give more and over longer periods of time, and really be invested in actually seeing these systems change, especially Black maternal health.
Thank you, Janine. So Chicago Beyond has taken a hard stand supporting Black maternal health, and there are proof points in the support of Janine and the Fellowship for Black Maternal Health that you announced alongside Hillary Clinton last year at the Clinton Global Initiative. We know philanthropic dollars can go far, like Janine just said, but Liz, this question is to you. What else can funders be doing? How should we be thinking about supporting practitioners like Janine and others nationwide?
Thanks for that question, Sona. As I think about the space that we operate in as funders, as philanthropists, in this philanthropy ecosystem, there is a real opportunity for us that oftentimes gets missed. And it's just the opportunity to operate in fullness. And oftentimes, philanthropy can feel very contracted. It can feel very restricted. And that's a choice. It's a very intentional choice. And it can look like, having to have, the randomized control trial with everything like baked out before you invest, even a penny's worth of money, But that's a choice. And we have the choice to really operate in fullness. And so what that means is like support. How are we supporting folks like Janine? How are we supporting the movement overall? And it's as much about what we do, whether it's like being cognizant of who we're funding and what the level is that we're funding at, thinking about what was written about in Pocket Change by the Ms. Foundation. It's also about, how are we helping folks that we're in proximity with, that we're partnering with, how are we helping them to navigate the complexities of, in whatever way that we can. So in our partnership with Janine and the Southside Birth Center, it's complex, like real estate, the zoning, like the bill, all these things are like complex, like working together and in tandem and mutuality to partner together to be supportive of that. And it's also about what we don't do. And so I think in philanthropy is a real opportunity not to ask someone to spend, for example, 30% of their time reporting for a grant that was like $5,000. You know what I'm saying? Like we have to be cognizant of time. And so, we tried to, when we started the fellowship that Janine mentioned, Chicago Beyond invested $1 million to help Janine and the standing up at the Southside Birth Center, but it was also strategic supports to be able to dream and to be able to do. And oftentimes we do not give people in our space of philanthropy, those that we're supporting and working with, space to dream and to do. We sort of piecemeal these things. The second thing I'll say is it's also about, recognizing and leaning into collaboration. Janine just does this like masterfully. Very quick story is that there was some back and forth and conversations. Ultimately, like the governor's office had asked Janine to advise on what they were going to be doing with like policy and these things. And, Janine said yes, but she also said yes. And here's these other 14 other people that we're going to bring along. I'm bringing along with me who are also in this work, who are also doing things in this vein. And so there's this opportunity really in that same spirit of what Janine did to really bring in this like collaborative spirit and bringing others into the fold with us. And we have chances to occupy seats and tables. It's not going it alone, we're bringing others in. And then lastly, I'll say that operating in fullness really requires us to acknowledge that, and this is hard for sometimes I think philanthropy, this is not just about pouring money into something. It is that, and it's also about fundamentally doing something differently. And to do that as philanthropists, as funders, we have to sort of step back and we have to say, what is the ecosystem that we're operating in this case, birthing? How does that ecosystem actually work? And then how do we have to move as funders to actually support the work of making it working differently? And so if we understand this really is a state level thing, if we understand that there's actually like evidence-based solutions like birth centers, like, Medicaid and it's supporting birth centers, all of those things, and we know those things have not been resourced, we might say like, okay, let's get a lot of different things going around in different states in the country. Or for those of us who have relationships with, zoning attorneys, let's make sure we're supporting different birth centers across the country that are seeking to open with those types of supports. Because if we think it's just about, again, pouring money as funders into this issue, and that somehow, makes this like magic thing wand appear, and all of a sudden it's all the changes we desire because we've written a check, it's not going to happen. And what will happen, we've seen this throughout history, is like we'll look up in 4 years and we'll say, you know what? We're going to pull out of this issue area, and we're going to pull out of this issue area because, oh, look, it's not, quote unquote, it's not working, or there's something wrong fundamentally with Black babies, they're just dying, and let's move on. And it's not that, it's about how are we going to, again, do something differently. And that's why, was proud to announce our partnership today with Birth Center Equity in Detroit. It is that $4 million investment that Chicago Beyond made into them. And it is because they're doing something differently. They are shaking up the status quo. Out of the 400 birthing centers that exist in the country, they are currently in community with and building community with and supporting, pulling together, organizing over 10% of those, over 40 organizations. They're helping build out financial models that will actually help make those birth centers fiscally sound, despite all the, things that are happening with like Medicaid. They're working on policy similar to what Tanya talks so brilliantly about, is they are actually lifting up and creating narrative, sharing stories that help move people into spaces to, again, do things differently. And again, like as philanthropists, as funders, if we want to see things change, we have to support those entities, those people those ideas that help to do things differently as well.
Thank you so much for that, Liz. I want to also add on to that. You mentioned that like it's not enough, right, to write a check. It's bigger than dollars. And so one of the things we have also seen work is that investing in the people who are doing the work as well, and not just the work. So we actually released a follow-up to our initial Pocket Change report, which is called Living with Pocket Change. And it underscores the impact of that disinvestment and that underinvestment. And so what Pocket Change 2, Living with Pocket Change does, is a call to action to philanthropy to also invest in healing justice, to also invest in supporting the leaders who are doing the work, who in a field like birth justice, a lot of the leaders doing this work have lived experience. They've been harmed by the medical industrial complex. They have their own birth stories. And so they are already coming to this work with a great deal of harm that has been caused to them. And then they're doing this work tirelessly, oftentimes underfunded. I say often, like, this work is going to get done with or without our dollars, right? People are doing the work, and the way that we invest and the amount that we invest is going to determine whether or not they can do this for the long haul, like sustainably, whether or not they're able to feed their children while doing the work, and whether or not they're able to take care of themselves, their staffs, as well. So we also have developed a series of capacity building programs that support what you said, the full person, the full organization. And so you can sign up for some financial management classes, or you can sign up for our Well-Rested Leaders series. You can get a sabbatical, right, supported. But we really seek ways to notice what else are our grantee partners asking for? What are they not asking for but need? And they're not asking for it because they don't even know it's possible to ask a funder for these things. And I feel very privileged to be in this position because I come from an organization who once was asking funders for things. And as a funder, I show up in the way that I needed a funder to show up for me. So thank you for everything you just shared. It really deeply resonates. So we're going to move on from talking about funding to talking about policy. We know that funding can impact, right, the work that's being done and can advance or hinder progress. And so we want to talk a little bit about policy recommendations. So Tanya, what policy changes at the local and national levels do you believe would most significantly impact Black maternal health outcomes?
Well, first and foremost, I think that midwives need to be covered by insurance. I think midwives need to be able to be the front of birthing centers. I think I'm sure that's the case in Chicago. I know here in New York State, we still cannot have a midwife-facing birthing center. We must have an OB-GYN. And I know there are people out there who are working around that, because there are some wonderful doctors who are allies, who will work with midwives, but midwives should be able to set up shop and lead their birthing centers, and should be covered. I think we need to cover doula care, should be covered. Women should be covered. All women should have some sort of healthcare coverage a year postpartum. As we know, many of the deaths that happen postpartum. Oh gosh, and I know there are many others as well, but those are, to me, some of the top policies that need to happen. And I'm not sure what's happening with maternal mortality review committees, but we need to make sure that those are run properly and really well regulated, and that we're really learning. I mean, I think how we collect data needs to be clear, because there's so much confusion in how data is collected, really understanding, what is causing maternal death, and things like that. But I know Janine has has probably a lot more to offer on that than I do.
Yeah, Janine, you are no stranger to policy change. The fact that we can even have a birth center being built in Chicago required a lot of legislative work. You were key in changing those laws to allow birth centers. What can others learn from your experience, and what do policymakers need to know?
Yes, that was a whole ride. But I was grateful because I got to put my master's degree in public health to use. It was in global health policy. So I think people need to keep talking. I feel like one thing that I had to get really comfortable with was knowing that I was confident about the solution, that there were many examples of these solutions, and I just had to keep talking to everyone. I would talk to anyone that wants to talk to me about what we're doing. And so that came in handy when it came talking to Congress people about the bill we were trying to carry. I was calling folks, setting up meetings to meet with their interns and with their staffers, just talking, because you will eventually meet allies, meet your community, meet the people who will help advocate with you. That is super important to know that you're not alone, and that if you believe in a solution, there are other people that also believe in that solution and that will support you. Yeah, and then policymakers need to know honestly about what's happening. I really love the example that Liz shared around meeting with the governor's team, with, I like to call them my birth worker dream team, because we were able to literally speak to all of our needs in this ecosystem. I think a lot of time people think that birth happens in isolation, but birth happens in tandem with abortion care and homelessness and unemployment and food deserts. And like, so we were able to, in safety and community, we were able to bring all of these justices to the governor's table to say, like, we're all doing this work, but we all know that this work is only part of the larger work for liberation and justice. And so I think policymakers need to hear that and understand, exactly what barriers are put in place. Like Tanya was speaking, like we are currently advocating for higher reimbursement from Medicaid, or we'll never be able to stay open. And so just really being able to speak to what is needed for you to be successful, it will be really important for policymakers to know.
Yeah, I think along those lines, and it's like you said, there's so many intersecting issue areas that happen together. And Tanya, you highlighted that a lot of these deaths happen in the postpartum period. And so there's this postpartum expansion that is needed, but also we have to think about, we live in a country that does not have a federal parental leave. And so even a policy like that can support advancing birth justice. And so there are so many policy implications to this work, and we could be here all day talking about all the systems that need to change and all the policies that need to change. But I'm going to pivot because we're, getting close to our time. And I'm going to ask Liz, can you just share, what are some of the bright spots that you have seen? Where should we be looking?
Well, I think some of them are right on our Zoom right now. And the work that each of us has taken on, whether it's the work that Janine is doing both on the south side of Chicago, but also really state and nationwide. Sona, whether it's what you're talking about with the over $4 million and 60+ organization that the Ms. Foundation is supporting. Obviously, Tanya, the work that you're doing, whether it's in the narrative space or in other ways to advocate for this issue. So I think there are definitely, in Chicago Beyond's work, obviously, as well, with BCE and birthing overall. I would say that in addition to that, there's a couple things that are like just top of mind for me as I think about this space. One is what's happening with Kansas Birth Justice Society. For those of you who might know Sapphire Garcia, who is just a powerhouse, who is out there navigating just so much in Kansas and really working to create birthing spaces and places and supports for Black women, Indigenous women, Latinx women across the state, literally across the state of Kansas. And also we think of our own just governor here in Illinois, Governor Pritzker, who just recently announced the $23 million to be allocated in the Illinois state budget. And what was interesting about that, it was, that, pieces of that really centered on this idea of community-based reproductive healthcare providers that are in and of communities they serve, which is something that was specifically called out that I thought was really powerful. So when you think about just like language and how money is moving, there are several, I think, bright spots in this work.
Thank you so much, Liz. So that's our time for the questions that we had. But now I'd like to open the floor for questions from the audience. All right, I have questions coming in. And this can go to anyone on the panel. Do you have any thoughts on how we can address the intersecting challenges faced by pregnant Black women and families experiencing homelessness, particularly in mitigating the adverse childhood experiences and breaking the generational cycle of generational homelessness through increased access to resources and support? I am a homeless service provider here in Chicago who is passionate about ending generational homelessness.
I'll start. I think this is a huge problem for Chicago. There are not enough beds and there are not enough. Let me just give a quick anecdote. I'll be super fast. I had a pregnant client that needed to get out of a violent home. And she was, I think, 38 weeks pregnant, and she was able to stay at a home that we found her just until she had her baby. Babies were not allowed in that shelter, and to think of her needing to be newly postpartum and have a baby and move back into the home that she had just fled from was devastating. I spent hours and hours trying to find services for her. So I think this is a real problem in Chicago specifically. And I think it would be helpful to contact other, like HFS. There's people on HFS who are interested in hearing about how pregnancy and homelessness are intersecting. I recently heard of organization Oak Park that takes in whole families. So I think it would be, homelessness is not my expertise, but creating a network of homeless providers who also work with pregnant people and families could be a great source of support and resource for you.
All right. We have another question about transferring the lessons that we learn working, centering Black women and Black families, Black birthing people, and the Black community. How do we transfer that knowledge to other communities who are facing similar issues?
I think that's an interesting question. I think that when you center Black women, and you begin to solve the problem for Black women, you help solve the problem for all. I mean, as we talk about Indigenous communities, we talk about Latinx communities, you have to kind of start somewhere. And when you see the models that work, certainly for us, they will work for everyone. And so, I know in particular, the Indigenous community obviously is very hard hit as well on these issues. I know that they have a very hard time getting midwives and having the care. And I'm not saying midwives are the only answer. I mean, I certainly hold midwives up, as you all can hear. But I will say that the key for me right now is centering Black women. And as we find what works, then we can apply that to all communities, and that will work for all communities.
Yeah. Additionally, and I think this has come up a few times on this panel, is like the importance of being in conversation, the importance of being in community, the importance of being in partnership and in collaboration with others. And so this work is not being done in silos, even though the focus of this panel was Black maternal health. The conversations are happening. The conversations are intersectional. Birth justice and reproductive justice as movements are rooted in intersectionality and understand all the layers and all the ways all of our identities impact us and make us disproportionately impacted by birth injustice and by the injustices that are happening along the full reproductive health care spectrum. So I think going back to some recommendations for funders, I think funders really being rooted in knowing that and wanting to fund collaboration and creating spaciousness for organizations who may be centering Indigenous women, or organizations who may be centering migrants families, or organizations who are centering homeless families or incarcerated families. I have grantee partners that fit into all of those categories. And so for me, it's not just enough to fund them. I'm also trying to figure out ways to get them in rooms together so that they can talk to each other, so that they can learn from each other, so that they can strategize and say, this is what worked on the south side of Chicago. It may not work on that reservation or in that community, but there's at least some knowledge sharing that can be shared. And I also think it's important for us to document. So films like Aftershock, which documents the work that's being done, is so important because it ensures that these stories live on beyond us, right, who are doing this work today. And I'm going to take another question. I really like the idea of keep talking about the solutions and experiences. As an aspiring certified nurse midwife myself, I'd be curious about action items for people who might not be as involved in birth work. So this person is asking, what could folks who are not involved in birth work be doing?
I'll take a start with that. I think there's a level of just awareness that needs to be uplifted within our communities. And whether it's through, I was watching Aftershock, and I'd recommend that as like a starting point to really understand the stories of what is happening in our community, making sure that those ideas and that actually what is taking place actually spreads across in different communities and throughout different cities. I also think so that there's an onus that we have to take on educating ourselves and also educating those around us. And then I think it also boils down to like, how are we voting too? I mean, all of this, when we talk about policy changes and, Medicaid and like who is supported, who's not supported, boils down to like, coming to the polls and how people vote. And so I think, there are like, clear and measurable steps that we can do to raise people's like understandings. When they go to the polls, they understand like what it is they're voting for, who they're voting for, and what the actual implications are that are on women's bodies overall.
And I just like to add to that quickly that as we are talking, as we continue to talk about birthing, my concern has been that as we've rang the alarm, that people are now afraid to give birth. And so I just want to say here that I think we should be thinking about the sacred nature of birthing, to remember what it really is that we're doing when we're birthing, to think about the amazing rite of passage that birth is for those of us who choose or that do birth, and to hold that up high, and that we try to, because I feel a great responsibility now to try to turn this conversation around, one from fear to excitement about the amazing thing that our bodies do in giving birth and bringing life here. And so as we continue talking, let's just remember the sacredness of what we do and how beautiful and amazing it is, and how lucky and privileged we are to be able to bring life forward.
Yeah, I often say that like we all have a birth story. It's the one thing that unites us all. We all were born. And so you mentioned early on in this panel, Tanya, like it's the foundation, right? It's the foundation. Janine, I think you also had something to add to this answer.
Yes, and I'll be quick. I just wanted to challenge all of us to think more expansively around birth. Birth is not just a doula or a midwife or someone that attends birth. There are many birth workers who never go to births. There are many birth workers who are writing grants. There are many birth workers who are growing farms. Like, I feel like when I talk to my daughter about not eating ramen noodles every day because they're endocrine disruptors, that is me doing birth work. I want us to really just know, if you know someone who has ever thought about being pregnant, thought about not being pregnant, who needs access to reproductive health care, you're doing birth work. Birth is more expansive. And when we think about what's happening in Alabama with IVF, and when we think about, bans, possible bans on mifepristone, those things are also in tandem with, birth. And so I want us to be very, think more expansively about what that means as community care individuals. We are going to know somebody who's going to need our support in navigating reproductive health care, and that is actually doing birth work.
Thank you for that. That's a good segue into this next question, which I think you kind of answered already. And this person mentions you specifically, Janine. Says Janine mentioned other issues like employment status and housing that intersect with birth. Who isn't involved in birth justice that you would like to bring into the fold? Not necessarily a specific person, but perhaps other expertise areas, experiences, knowledge seekers, organizations, agencies, industries, or sectors.
I nerd out on anything that has to do with climate resistance or environmental justice and birth work. I was just recently listening. If you get our newsletter, you'll see I was recently listening to a podcast about how noise pollution interrupts birds' fertility. And now I'm obsessed about thinking about what do people who live in urban settings do for our own stress and fertility. So I really think there are people who are speaking about environmental justice and birth work. Too many for me to name, but I would really love more of that to be brought into the intersection.
That was a great answer. I'm often thinking about both, right? Environmental justice, climate justice. I'm also often thinking about our carceral system and how there's a whole other layer of disparities that exist for birthing people who are incarcerated. And so I think there are some connections that like the abolition movement can have with birth justice. I'm also often thinking about economic justice and what does it look like to bring those who are working towards like universal income into the birth justice conversations, or those who are working on early childhood into this conversation. I think there's so many possible intersections, but like Janine mentioned in the previous question, everyone, right? All of those things and everyone. It's like a perpetual ... Everyone needs to be involved in this conversation because it truly does impact us all. At this time, thank you all for your questions. At this time, I'm going to hand the mic over to Liz Dozier to close us out.
Thank you, Sona. Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Tanya, for being here with us in community and having this conversation today. Just want to encourage everyone who's on the Zoom, who's listening today, to continue to stay engaged in advocacy for maternal health overall. We're going to share a slide that actually has contact information. You can follow our organizations for updates. We're also going to share a survey that should be popping up in your chat now. We'd love to hear from you in terms of what you thought about this event, how we can best continue this conversation. So we'll again be sending those resources out to you, and also would really appreciate your feedback on this survey. So again, thank you to our panelists, and you'll be seeing us all soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.